Welcome back, U.S. history students. Today we are going to be looking at the beginnings of America's involvement in World War I. Yesterday in class we covered the alliance system, nationalism, and militarism being the three big reasons that World War I has started, and we kind of know the events that kicked it off. But this is a U.S. history course, and we have to look at how the United States got involved in the war. So the war raged down from 1914 to 1916 without the United States. It was ravaging Europe. The United States didn't have any physical involvement at the time, meaning we didn't have any troops on the ground. We were not dropping bombs all over Europe by any means at all. In fact, the only thing we were actually doing with the Europeans at this time was trading, and we were trading quite a bit. The United States had a pretty strong manufacturing base that we know was getting built up during the Industrial Revolution, and we were able to supply Europe with a lot of the necessities they needed to fight this war. Now, the American public was a bit split on who to support, and we realize that this is the case due to all the immigration that we had leading up until this time. Just think about how many immigrants were coming to America. Where were they coming from? Why were they coming? We didn't have Donald Trump yet saying that we needed to build a wall, so we're not keeping any of the immigrants necessarily out unless you're Chinese at this time. But where are they all coming from? Where they're mostly coming from places in Europe that we didn't necessarily like too much, like Italy and Greece and Romania and all those Ireland, places where Europeans are Catholic. But we also still do have immigrants coming from France and Great Britain and Germany, places where we are okay with having immigrants coming from because they hold more of our WASP values, that common ancestry, language, and values. And many people in the United States are WASPs, and they have that background. So we were okay really being tied to places like France, Britain, and Germany, which comes to be a problem when the two of them, as we know, are on opposite sides of the war. But the United States was practicing what we call at this time as neutrality, just like the country of Belgium. The United States is trying to remain neutral in this whole thing. They do not want to get involved in World War I. They have no reason to. It's not being fought on our soil. It's not involving our citizens. There's no reason for us to get involved in World War I. Asking why I have a creepy face swap with our textbook, don't really know why this picture made its way in here. I don't even remember putting this picture in here, but it's thoroughly creepy. That's some good work. So as the war rages on, America's opinion of entering into the war begins to change. We become less sympathetic to the German side of things, despite our large German immigrant base, and start being more sympathetic to the British and the French and the Allied side of the war. The war was becoming extremely, extremely violent, which is actually a pretty sad story if we look at it in the case of Belgium. Now, the country of Belgium was getting kind of hit from both sides of the war, and Germany eventually moved into the country. And we get reports out of this time that Germans are just killing off large numbers of Belgian people. Some reports estimate that 23,700 were killed by the end of the war. And we're going to kind of evaluate these claims and look at some anti-German propaganda in class tomorrow to really get at the heart of this. But just know that the United States and our people, our opinions of the war are beginning to change when we start getting these reports that the Germans are just committing these atrocities against the Belgians. We have all of these newspaper headlines focusing in on Belgian cities, that women and children are being slaughtered. We have anti-German campaigns coming out. I mean, we have a dead baby on a bayonet here held by a German person. Doesn't look very positive. Germans being portrayed as guerrillas or as burning the countryside. And all of these are saying, have the same message of remember Belgium. Remember Belgium, trying to get the United States people or people from other countries on board with the Allied side and fighting against Germany. We're going to look at that much more heavily in class tomorrow. So America's becoming more involved, but still up to this point, we're just trading. We're just trading with both sides of the war, in fact. But the British kind of stopped that from happening. During the war, the British decided to form a naval blockade around Germany, which means they basically stopped any naval-based or water-based shipments from being able to reach Germany, which prevented any trade that the United States had with Germany, because we don't have a railroad that goes across oceans to Germany. Anything that we were going to trade with Germany had to be taken by ship. And the United States wasn't too happy about this. We were fine trading with both sides. We wanted to keep those lines of communication open, and especially keep that money coming. And the United States wasn't too happy about this, but it was a pretty great military tactic. I mean, it's not great that 750,000 Germans starved to death because of it, but the British naval blockade was very successful. And Germany obviously was pretty angry that they couldn't get any shipments in. They couldn't get anything for their military, for their people. They had people starving all over the place. So they began sinking all ships off the coast of Great Britain. They sent German U-boats, which are like submarines, out over to Great Britain. And they started sinking all the ships around Great Britain, trying to get them to lift this naval blockade so they could get supplies in and actually fight in this war. And on May 7th, 1915, the Germans sunk a ship that's pictured right here called the Lusitania. And this is really the first American involvement in the war, because 1,198 people died due to the sinking of this ship, and 128 of them were American. Up until this point, no Americans had died in World War I, a war that we're not fighting, a war that we're trying to remain neutral in. When we have 128 of our citizens that die at the hands of the Germans, that becomes an issue. So let's take a quick peek back here at some of the political happenings. So we have President Woodrow Wilson here. We know him already from the Progressive era. He was elected initially in 1912, and in 1916 he won re-election again in a pretty close race. During that time, and right after he became president again, Germany sank 2 more ships that had United States citizens on board. President Wilson did not want to enter into the war. He knew the American people generally did not want to enter into the war, but we could not continue to have Germany sinking ships with our citizens on it, especially if we're not wanting to be involved in the war. Wilson tried to reason with Germany, talk with them, but Germany just redoubled their efforts. They actually started sinking more ships. They weren't going to listen to the United States. Germany basically told us, then you get Great Britain to open back up our ports and stop this blockade so we can get supplies back in. The United States could not reason with Britain to do that, so we're really stuck in a tough place here. And then Germany makes one fatal mistake. It was something called the Zimmermann Note. The Zimmermann Note was a telegram. A telegram is an older form of communication, and it was actually between the country of Germany and Mexico on our southern border. And the subject of this note was that Germany was asking for an alliance with Mexico, and that if, basically what the note said, that if the United States were to enter into the war, that Mexico would support the German side, or that the Mexican government would agree to attack the United States. Obviously, the United States took quite offense to this, and we realized that Mexico's down here, and if they're agreeing to enter into World War I, this could bring World War I onto our soil, which is something that we wanted to avoid at all costs. We realized that it was going to be very, very, very difficult to remain completely out of this war. We've already been involved in it economically, but now it's getting to the point where it could be brought to our own soil and to our own people. At this time as well, Russia's government was being overthrown, which we'll talk about more a little bit later in this unit, and they're becoming more democratic. And this is mattering for the United States as a whole, because we see that another country is kind of adopting democracy, and we see that we can maybe start to spread democracy around the world as well. We know that's kind of an ideal of the age of imperialism that we just covered, and that's something that we value and would like to happen. So we see this as maybe another opportunity if we do enter into the war, that maybe we can spread democracy to other countries in Europe. We will look at this in class, but this is the Zimmerman note itself. So on April 2nd, 1917, the United States officially signed, or Woodrow Wilson signed a resolution to enter us into World War I. We declare war on the other powers in Europe that were fighting against Great Britain and France and Belgium, mostly focusing on Austria, Hungary, and Germany as our big enemies during this. And really, Woodrow Wilson told the people that this was in the name of American exceptionalism, that we are going to bring democracy to the rest of the world, that we're going to protect our own interests, we're going to spread our culture, spread our economy, and we're going to make the world a better place. That we just could not remain out of this war. We needed to intervene in order to help end it. So that's all I have for you guys today. Be prepared to be looking at this more in detail in class tomorrow.